Well, here we are. We meet again on the ultimate unsolved serial killings and mass murders iceberg. I hope you're prepared to discuss the macabre and morbid, because we're diving right on in, so buckle your fuckles, send your dad to the shadow realm, and most of all, get comfy. Tube sock killings. On August 10th, 1985, Steve Harkins, 27, and his girlfriend Ruth Cooper, 42, getting in on that MILF shit, huh, Steve? Left their Tacoma home for a weekend camping trip to a lake. The following week, the two didn't return to their jobs at a vocational school. The following Monday, their families reported them missing. 4 days later, on August 14th, hikers passing through Pierce County found Harkins' body near a remote campsite. He'd been shot in the head, and his body, still in a sleeping bag, suggested he had been murdered while sleeping. Nearby searchers also found Harkins and Cooper's pet dog, who had also been shot to death. At the time, law enforcement suspected the case may have been connected to the murders of Edward Smith and Kimberly Diane Levine, a couple from Kent, Washington, who were also abducted, murdered, and disposed of in a gravel pit near Columbia River in March 1985. But nothing ever came of that lead. Over a month after the discovery of Ruth Cooper, who was found dead, shot in the gut and the abdomen, Mike Rayner, 36, and his girlfriend Diana Robertson, 21, the exact opposite of the last case, Jesus Christ, Mike, don't rob the cradle, and their daughter, Crystal Louise Robertson, age 2, traveled from their Tacoma home to Pierce County. Judging off of that statement alone, you already know how poorly this ends. Raymer, an animal trapper, also planned to check traps that he had set in that area, and then later on the evening that they headed out, customers at a Kmart store 30 miles north in Spanaway found their daughter, Crystal, standing outside the store entrance. Crystal was placed in temporary foster care until her grandmother came to get her, and when questioned by the authorities, the only thing Crystal could really say about it was that Mommy was up in the trees. Now, because of the fact that Crystal was only 2 years old, she wasn't nearly verbal enough to provide any evidence on the case, and she was kind of left at that. The police searched the areas for the bodies for quite some time. They did eventually find one of the bodies in a skull, but what they haven't found, and likely never will find, is a murderer. This case remains unsolved to this day. Now, you may be wondering why these were called the tube sock killings, and that was because a tube sock was found tied around Ruth Cooper's neck when she was discovered dead, which gave local news outlets the genius idea of a lifetime. Let's give it a catchy fucking nickname. Walker family killings. While on death row, a convicted serial killer, Emmett Monroe Spencer, confessed to the murders of the Walker family. However, Saratoga County Sheriff Ross Boyer was well aware of Mr. Spencer's shit and labeled Spencer a pathological liar. Maybe it had been some final bid for attention, or maybe because Emmett had actually done it, but it was said nonetheless. The actual murder case, however, is on December 19th, 1959. Christine and Cliff Walker and their 2 children are murdered at their home in Osprey, Florida, and to this day the case remains unsolved. The details of the case, of course, are rather horrific. 24-year-old Christine Walker arriving at the family's farm home at around 4 p.m., where she was raped and murdered by gunshot. Her husband, Cliff, was murdered by gunshot. Their children killed by gunshot. And the sick fuck that did that was never found. There was some developments in 2012 in which people with similar motives and similar victim sets in different states were identified to potentially be the killers of the Florida family. However, because of the fact it was so long ago, nothing can be definitively proven or disproven. And so to this day, and likely for forever, this case remains completely unsolved. Cowden family murders. Richard Cowden, a logging truck driver that was 28 years old, decided that over Labor Day weekend of 1974, he, his wife Belinda, age 22, their children David, age 5, and Melissa, age 5 months, were going to go for a camping trip. They were residents of White City, Oregon. However, they made their camping trip near Canberry Creek in Copper, Oregon. On August 30th, the family, alongside their pet basset hound Droopy, arrived at the campsite. They parked their '56 Ford pickup on Cranberry Creek Road, a short distance away from the campsite, and got to business. On September 4th, 1974, Richard Cowden and his son David arrived at the Copper General Store at approximately 9 a.m., where Richard purchased milk. The two then departed the store on foot, headed back to the campsite. This was the last sighting of any of the Cowden family. Later that same evening, Belinda's mother, who lived less than a mile away from the campground, was expecting the family to come over for dinner on their way home. When they failed to arrive, she went to their campsite near the creek, but found nobody there. Family's belongings, however, were all present. A plastic dishpan full of cold water lay on the ground, while the keys to the family's truck as well as Belinda's purse were in plain sight on a picnic table. A diaper bag as well as a camp stove, fully assembled, were also in plain view, alongside with the carton of milk Richard had purchased earlier that day, sitting on the table, half full. Unable to locate anyone, Belinda's mother panicked. When she noticed several items belonging to Richard lying on the ground, including an expensive wristwatch and his wallet, which contained $21, equivalent to $110 in 2020. Wow, that's sad. And also an open pack of cigarettes, which she identified as being the brand Belinda was known to smoke, and the family's truck, she went to the police immediately. Because of her failure to notify the police that anything violent had happened, or the fact that cops are universally a fucking joke at doing their job, which is protecting the people, the cops delayed the search by a day before finally going out there. Once they went on that search, though, oh fucking boy was it a search. One of the largest in Oregon history, including state and local police, thousands of volunteers, and even the Oregon National Guard, alongside planes and helicopters equipped with infrared technology that would detect overturned dirt. All of these search efforts and all of this stuff was completely in vain, however. The bodies were not found until April 12, 1975, when two gold prospectors from Forest Grove, Oregon were hiking through the woods near Cranberry Creek and discovered the decomposing body of an adult man tied to a tree on a steep hillside. In a small cave nearby, the bodies of an adult woman, a child, and an infant were discovered. Positive identification of the bodies as those of the Cowden family was made via dental records. The location where the bodies were discovered was approximately 7 miles from the family's campsite. Autopsies revealed that Belinda and David had died as a result of a .22 caliber gunshot wound. 5-month-old Melissa had died from severe head trauma, and the cause of death for their 5-year-old son isn't listed. The investigation was conducted with numerous people who were on the campground at September 1st. However, nothing ever came up. At one point, Dwayne Lee Little, a serial killer, was suspected of killing the family, but because of the fact that he was long gone by the time they were turned on to him, nothing ever came of it. And to this day, why what happened to the Cowden family happened still remains as unknown, and who did it is also still unknown. Upstairs lounge arson attack. On Sunday evening, June 24th, 1973, over a weekend when Christopher Street Pride celebrations took place in seemingly every American city but New Orleans, the regular beer bust drink special attracted its usual blue-collar gay crowd to the upstairs lounge. The club was located on the second floor of a 3-story building at the corner of Chartres and Iberville Streets. Members of the Metropolitan Community Church, a pro-LGBT Protestant denomination, were there after service. The MCC was the United States' first national gay Christian fellowship, founded in Los Angeles in 1968. The local congregation had held services in the upstairs lounge theater for a while. That night's beer bust from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. attracted approximately 110 patrons. After the drink special ended, about 60 to 90 patrons remained, and they listened to pianist George Stephen Bud Mathieu perform and discussed an upcoming MCC fundraiser for the local crippled children's hospital. At 7:56 p.m., a buzzer from downstairs sounded, and bartender Buddy Ramusen, an Air Force veteran, asked Luther Boggs to answer the door, anticipating a taxicab driver. Boggs opened the door to find the front staircase engulfed in flames, along with the smell of lighter fluid. Ramusen immediately led some 20 patrons out of the back exit to the roof, where the group could access a neighboring building's roof and climb down to the ground floor. Others saw the floor-to-ceiling windows as a most promising means of escape, despite the fact that they were safety bars on the windows with a 14-inch gap between them to prevent dancers from breaking through the glass. Several people somehow managed to squeeze through, some still burning when they reached the ground below. Luther Boggs was one who came through the window in flames after pushing his female friend through the gap. The flames on Boggs were extinguished by the owner of the neighboring bar, but he died on the 10th of July, 16 days later, from third-degree burns on 50% of his body. Reverend Bill Larson of the MCC removed an air conditioning unit from the bottom of one of the floor-to-ceiling windows and was attempting to get out when an upper pane of glass fell on him, pinning him to the window frame, half in the burning window and half out. His charred remains would be visible to onlookers for hours afterwards, recorded in many of the pictures taken out in front of the building in the aftermath of the 16-minute fire. Firefighters stationed 2 blocks away found themselves blocked by cars and pedestrian traffic. One fire truck who tried to maneuver on the sidewalk crashed into a taxi. They arrived to find the bar patrons struggling against the security bars and quickly brought the fire under control. 28 people died at the scene of the 16-minute fire, and 1 died en route to the hospital. Another 18 suffered injuries, of whom 3, including Boggs, died. The investigation conveniently failed to yield any convictions because a cop's job is not to protect you, it's to protect the people who pay them. However, they did question a patron of the bar who had been thrown out for fighting with other patrons of the bar who conveniently had a broken jaw, because those are the kinds of people who were starting fires. Nunez, the person who was questioned, though, was diagnosed with conversion hysteria in 1970 because in the 70s science was also a joke, and visited numerous psychiatric clinics. He was released from a treatment facility in the year before the fire, and after his arrest, Nunez escaped from psychiatric custody and was never picked up again by police, despite frequent appearances in the French Quarter. A friend later told investigators that Nunez confessed to on at least 4 occasions starting the fire. He told the friend he squirted the bottom of the step with Ronsonol, is that how you say it? Lighter fluid, bought at a local Walgreens. He tossed a match and did not realize, he claimed, that the whole place would go up in flames. These claims never could be verified, though, because Nunez took his own life in November 1974. And in 1980, the state's fire marshal office, lacking any leads, closed the case. Wow, from this iceberg, the 70s were not the place to be, were they? Investor Massacre. On September 7th, 1982, the fishing boat Investor was found burning off the coast of Craig, Alaska. This is one of two things to have ever happened in Craig, Alaska. The boat's passengers and crew were found to have been killed, but due to the badly burned state of their bodies, investigators were really only certain that they had recovered the remains of 7 bodies. There were 8 people on board. A coroner's jury ruled that all 8 who were aboard the boat had been killed. The boat's owner, Mark Colthurst, from Blaine, Washington, his wife, Irene, and their 2 young children were among the victims. In September 1984, a suspect, John Kenneth Peel from Bellingham, Washington, was arrested for the murders, but Peel's first trial ended in a hung jury, and his retrial in 1988 ended in acquittal. To this day, not only is there not much information on the massacre itself, but there's no answers to what happened. Bain family murders. On the morning of June 20th, 1994, David Bain called the 111 New Zealand emergency number at 7:09 a.m. in a distressed state and told the operator, "They're all dead." When the police arrived, they found 5 members of the Bain family shot to death. Of the family of 6, David was the only survivor. 4 days later, in what is widely regarded as a mock and sham trial, David was tried for all 5 counts of murder. The case only lasted 3 weeks. The courts found him guilty, and from there he would spend 1995 to 2009 in jail, because, fun fact, even in what is seemingly the most happiest country in the world, New Zealand, it's actually the Scandinavian countries that are happier. Even there, the legal system is a joke, because universally, legal systems are fucking jokes. Now, of course, David Bain spent this time in prison, but he had the support of Joe Karam, a former all-black rugby player, and he felt something was wrong, so using his status, he petitioned to get David Bain out, and it was because of him that the 2009 retry of the case was held. The 2009 retrial obviously found that David Bain wasn't guilty because of the fact that he hadn't even been home at the time of the murders. He was making a run on his paper trail that he worked, and there was also almost no other evidence to support that David Bain had committed the murders other than the fact that he was the only one left alive. Chillingly, though, on the computer that had been turned on by whoever did the deed was, "Sorry, you were the only one who deserved to live," directly towards David Bain. David Bain, since, after being released from prison, went on a European holiday tour after spending over 10 years in jail, married a teacher, and legally changed his name, where he continues to live his life on the down low. So, good for him. Hopefully some sort of justice was served in this situation, but I can't say for certain that it was. Texas killing fields. Since the early 70s, bodies of murder victims have been found within the killing fields area. They're mainly the bodies of girls or young women, and furthermore, many young girls have disappeared from this area. Their bodies are still missing. It's believed that many of the murders in the Texas killing fields are the work of multiple serial killers. Most of the victims were aged 12 to 25 years. Some shared similar physical features, such as similar hairstyles. But despite efforts made by the League City, Texas police, along with the assistance of the FBI, only 2 of these murders have actually been solved. And those that have been solved were predictated on confessions given by prisoners or confessions given under duress from the police. And those confessions just don't work because a prisoner's got every reason to lie, and police are actually kind of shit at interrogating. As a matter of fact, 90% of it just revolves around gaslighting you into thinking you did the crime so that they don't have to actually do their fucking job. Wow, I'm mocking police a lot in this video, and they deserve it. Now, if you see the list of victims, which is 30 long, it'll be on screen now. It's absolutely massive, and the two cases out of this entire list that have been solved are the Crystal Jean Baker case. In April 2012, 16 years after Crystal Jean Baker's beaten, raped, and strangled body was found, Kevin Edison Smith was arrested and convicted of murdering her. In 2009, Smith had been arrested on a drug charge in Louisiana. At about the same time, a detective tested Baker's dress for DNA. A match was confirmed using advanced technology that was not available at the time of Crystal's disappearance. The jury deliberated for all of 30 minutes and then found the sick fuck guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison. And the Shelley Sykes case. In 1987, 30-year-old John Rupert King phoned the El Paso police, claiming that on May 24, 1986, he, together with 33-year-old Gerald Peter Zwarst, attacked Shelley Sykes while she was in her car, after which the girl was raped and strangled. After his arrest, Zwarst told the police that he had hidden the body in one of the fields where the other bodies were found. Both men were asked to indicate the whereabouts of Sykes' bodies in exchange for dodging the life sentence, but their directions failed to uncover it. King and Zwarst were convicted of aggravated kidnapping and received life imprisonment sentences in 1998. They were also probed for other such crimes committed during the mid-1980s, but both vehemently and conveniently denied any involvement. King died from natural causes behind bars in October 2015, while Zwarst died in prison in November of 2020. Atlanta Ripper. On May 28, 1911, the body of Belle Walker, an African cook, was found 25 yards away from her home on Garibaldi Street in Atlanta by her sister after she failed to return home from work the previous night. Her throat had been cut by an unknown person, and the crime was reported in the Atlanta Constitution under the headline, "Negro Woman Killed, No Clue to Slayer." As news of the murders continued to spread, the African-American population of Atlanta was filled with terror. On July 3rd, after the 8th consecutive killing, Black women stopped working after night, refusing to go out into the streets. News reports also noted the similarities of the victim in each case. By the end of 1911, 15 women, all black or dark-skinned, all in their early 20s, had been murdered in the same manner. The victims were all described as good-looking and neatly dressed, with many of them having received an education, something remarkable for the time period. The murders were all described as having been committed with a knife or other sharp object, with their gruesomeness being of particular note. The murderer, much like the other Ripper, Jack, would rip, tear, and mutilate the bodies of the victims after death. One victim, Lena Sharp, was described as having her head almost severed. The search for the serial killer, who had been cleverly dubbed the Atlanta Ripper by the press, very clever, good job, great job, someone should give you a raise for that, found 6 different subjects but made no convictions. The crime wasn't ever solved. The Ripper may have had as many as 21 victims, but there is no conclusive proof that the murders were carried out by only one person, as this could have been a hate crime conducted by multiple people. However, that theory is shot down by the reports from a daughter of one of the victims, who was also attacked by an assailant but recovered and caught sight of the attacker. She described him as a large black man who was powerfully built and neatly dressed. But again, with no evidence to corroborate anything, no one stepping forward, and no detectives good enough at the time period, as well as a distinct lack of forensic science, there is no answer, and because it was 100 years ago, over 100 years ago now, 110, soon to be 111, there never will be an answer on who exactly was the Atlanta Ripper, and just why they felt the need to do that. Connecticut River Valley Killer. In the mid-1980s, 3 young women disappeared around Claremont. In 1985 and 1986, the remains of 2 of the women were recovered within 1,000 feet of each other in a wooded area in Keeleyville, New Hampshire. The condition of the remains made the cause of death difficult to determine, but certain factors pointed to multiple stab wounds. Between the recovery of the first and second bodies, a 36-year-old woman was stabbed to death in a frenzied attack inside her home in Saxtons River, Vermont. 10 days later, the remains of a third missing woman were found. An autopsy again revealed evidence of multiple stab wounds. At this point, investigators began examining prior homicides in the area and found 2 previous cases in 1978 and 1981 that further reinforced the presence of a burgeoning serial killer. At the peak of the investigation and after additional homicides and 1 non-fatal attack, investigators noticed the similarities in MO, often used dump sites, and specific wound patterns that linked many of the murders, suggesting a common perpetrator. The victims are as following: 27-year-old Kathy Milliken, 16-year-old Bernice Countermanche, 27-year-old Eileen Fried, 27-year-old Ava Morse, 36-year-old Linda Moore, and many others. The attacks, however, ended after the 1 non-fatal attack, in which a 22-year-old, 7-month pregnant woman, Jane Borowski, was attacked by a man in a car who had pulled up to her car, investigated the license plates, spouted some bullshit, and then proceeded to stab her 22 times. Thankfully, her child was okay. She, however, was not so okay and was pretty injured. But even with 3 digits of the man's license plates, he was never found. Conveniently, though, after this close call with the police, the killings stopped, and they haven't picked up since. There have been a few confessions, one of which was written off as complete and utter bullshit, and another that was just simply not cared about by the police department because, 20 years after the whole ordeal, I guess the cops just don't care anymore. Ghouta chemical attack. The Ghouta chemical attack occurred in Ghouta, Syria during the Syrian Civil War. In the early hours of August 21st, 2013, 2 opposition-controlled areas in the suburbs around Damascus were struck by rockets containing the chemical agent sarin. Estimates of the death toll range from at least 281 people to 1,729. The attack was the deadliest use of chemical weapons since the Iran-Iraq War. Now, very conveniently, despite the place that was, gassed, was opposition-controlled, the Syrian government denied all responsibility, instead blaming foreign players. This is, of course, right after Barack Obama said that this would drastically change U.S. involvement if chemical weapons kept on being dicked around with. So how convenient, literally the day after Barack Obama says that, he goes up on stage and goes, "My fellow Americans, we tired of this shit. There's more chemical weapons used." 1979 Sydney Ghost Train Fire. Again with the 70s, god fucking damn, that must have been a shitty-ass decade to be alive. Now, the Sydney Ghost Train Fire happens on the night of June 9th, 1975, when a fire breaks out inside the Luna Park Ghost Train at approximately 10:15 p.m. Due to a combination of low water pressure, understaffing within the amusement park, and inadequate coverage of the ghost train by the park's fire hose system, the fire was able to completely consume the ride. It took an hour to bring the fire under control, but it was extinguished before any significant damage could be done to any of the other rides in the amusement park, because that's what really matters here, right? Around 35 people were believed to have been on the ride when thick smoke began to escape from the tunnel doors. Ride staff raised the alarm and began to pull people from the ride as their cars exited the tunnel. And it was initially thought that everybody had escaped the fire. but around 11:30 p.m., the bodies of 7 people were found inside the ride. John Goodson and his 2 children, Damien and Craig, and 4 Waverly College students, Jonathan Billings, Richard Carroll, Michael Johnson, and Shamus Rayleigh. At the time of the fires, investigating police speculated that the 7 had climbed out of their cars and unsuccessfully tried to find their way out of the tunnel. Had they stayed in their cars, they might have survived. Other evacuated passengers, of course, reported seeing empty cars exit the tunnel on fire, so maybe that wasn't the best idea, but who knows. Mr. Cruel. On August 22nd, 1987, in Lower Plenty, Victoria, Melbourne, a man broke into a family home at 4 a.m. after cutting the phone lines. He was armed with a knife and a gun. He tied the hands and feet of both parents and locked them in a wardrobe. He tied the son to a bed and then raped the 11-year-old daughter. On December 27th in Ringwood, he broke into the back door of a house at 5:30 a.m. Armed with a knife and a small hound gun, he bound and gagged the parents and demanded money. He grabbed their 10-year-old daughter, Sharon Wills, put tape over her eyes, a ball gag in her mouth, and abducted her. She was released 18 hours later on the grounds of Bayswater High School. On 3rd of July, 1990 in Canterbury, he broke into a house at 11:30 p.m., tied and gagged 13-year-old Nicola Linus, placed tape over her eyes, disabled the phones, and searched for money. He then drove her to another house and molested her for 15 hours before releasing her at a power substation in the suburb of Kev. This is the 3 confirmed crimes of Mr. Cruel, a notorious child serial rapist who keeps his face masked at all times. This creepy-ass mask is also what you see on the side of the iceberg level that we're on here. There is, impressively, a $1.2 million bounty on his head, and even though this is actually happening in Australia, or happened in Australia from the late 80s to the early 90s, the FBI got their grubby little fingers on it. He was that goddamn populous. Now this sick son of a bitch thrived off of the fear, and is suspected to have killed 1 child after abducting them, but there's no evidence for that, and because of the fact that we just can't find the fuck, it remains unsolved to this day. Both the child murder case and who this guy was. It's cases like these that make me wish there was a God, just so that they could aptly punish them. And I would be comfortable with all the terrifying ideals of religion if I got to know that scumbags like that got to be tortured by a personal tormentor in hell for all eternity. I guess that's why religion's so convenient. Well, lads, lasses, and la-enbies, we've done it. We've made it through level 3 of the ultimate unsolved serial killings and mass murders iceberg. For some context on just how massive this thing is, there you go. We're only on the 3rd level of 17 in. If you're new here, go ahead and just subscribe. You've made it this far. I'm gonna keep covering this, and I do other stuff I think you'd like. Plus, it's completely free and helps me pursue my dreams. You can always undo it later. And without further ado, now that I've been a self-shilling whore, to those of you who are subscribed and watched, thank you. To those of you who aren't subscribed and watch, thank you. I really appreciate being able to make these videos, and also just being able to mock cops for the fuck of it, for like 15 minutes, like I just did here. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and call this a video. Have a wonderful time. Memento Mori.